The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television. Major funding for your legislators is provided by Move Minnesota, a statewide coalition fighting for a 10-year commitment to fixing our dire transportation needs. A safe, reliable transportation system strengthens Minnesota's economy. Join the conversation at movemn.org. Additional funding provided by Flaherty and Hood has provided quality legal and legislative services to clients in Greater Minnesota for more than 20 years. Our legal team focuses on municipal employment and environmental law, while our lobbyists energetically represent clients at the state capitol. Online at flaherty-hood.com. MAPE members, making Minnesota Clean Water's safe communities, quality education, and veterans care happen. We work hard for Minnesotans. Live from St. Paul, Minnesota, we welcome you to the 35th session of Your Legislators, a roundtable discussion featuring state lawmakers who are prepared to answer your questions and discuss important issues affecting the citizens of Minnesota. Now, here is your moderator for tonight's program, Barry Anderson.
Good evening and welcome to this week's version of Your Legislators. We're delighted that you can join us this evening. This is our last program of the year. We have with us representatives of both major political parties, both the House and Senate, leadership, and we're here to talk a little bit about what happened in this legislative session. We have a couple of housekeeping details that I want to bring to your attention. We will be returning to you again in early March 2017. The legislature will convene on March 8. And the second little housekeeping note I'm going to, as we would say in my old days as a parliamentarian, a point of personal privilege, we're just going to mention here tonight that John Panzer, who was such a key part of this program for the last 25 years, will celebrate a birthday tomorrow. So happy birthday, John. Yeah. I'm going to hear about that later. So let's move right to the introduction of our distinguished panel of guests who are going to help us unravel the mysteries of St. Paul and talk a little bit about how the session ended, what remains to be done, and what is just ahead, because it appears we may have some activity. To my immediate left, frequent guest on the program, been with us many times, District 61B, Minneapolis, the House Minority Leader, Representative Paul Thiessen.
Hi.
Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, I have been in the legislature now I'm in my 7th term, and have served this year as the Minority Leader for the Democrats in the House. My wife and our 3 kids live in Minneapolis, grew up in Bloomington, and I'm really happy to be here.
You have one of the hockey players with us tonight, right?
One with me tonight. That's
very good, very good. Also joining us from District 37, Spring Lake Park, Senator Alice Johnson. Senator Johnson, we're thrilled you could be with us. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I now live in Blaine, not Spring Lake Park, and we just moved recently. I'm a first-term member of the Minnesota Senate representing Blaine, Coon Rapids, and Spring Lake Park. I served in the Minnesota House for 14 years, from 1986 to 2000, retired for 12 years, had a great time with my husband, Richard Jefferson, who was a former House representative member, and then ran for the Senate, and I've have experienced a great time in the last 3 years.
You unretired, and we're delighted to have you with us, so thank you for joining us. Another frequent guest with our program was with us early in the session, District 48, Eden Prairie, Senator David Hand. Notice I got the pronunciation right, Senator. Absolutely. After 10, 15 years, I'm slow, but I get there.
Eventually we get there.
Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I represent Eden Prairie and part of Minnetonka. My wife and I, we have 4 children. Only one still at home. He's a freshman in college, so the other 3 are off married and got a couple of grandchildren. And I've been in the legislature. This is my 4th term, and I am the current Minority Leader.
And finally, last but certainly not least, District 44A, Plymouth, Representative Sarah Anderson. Representative Anderson, again, has been a frequent guest. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was elected first in 2006, and I serve on Taxes and Commerce and Ways and Means, and I'm the chair of the State Government Finance Committee, and married to a school teacher who teaches physics and chemistry. And we have one son, Cole, who's 7 years old, and right now is at his school picnic. So.
There you go. Well, we have many things to cover tonight. I want to remind our viewers that this is your program. You should call in your questions or send them to us electronically. Instructions will be on your screen. We take Twitter, we take Facebook. It's astonishing the ways in which we can interrogate our guests. But we do have some questions that have come in already, and let's start there. I know there are some big questions we need to talk about, education being perhaps the most important one, and we're going to get to that. But I want to start with the questions from our viewers, and this comes from two viewers, one in Hillman and the other in St. Paul Park. They want to know whether or not the legislature took any action to protect hunting dogs from traps. He wants to know whether or not they're able to hunt this fall. Who can answer that question? Anybody have any?
I think the answer is no.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Not much.
There was some discussion early on about putting together something to change I think the snaring law, but I don't know what happened to it, but it just apparently got bogged down in the process, but we never saw a bill in the Senate.
I found it very interesting that, really it was one of my top topics that I received calls, emails, so forth on that issue. The people that are interested in that legislation are very, very, very concerned.
Animal issues probably are the biggest constituent inquiry I get every year.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
The funny thing is every time I come on this show, that's the question that gets asked. So either it's the same person or...
It's right here. Representative Anderson's here. Ask about the dogs.
There you go. See?
No, it is. I would suggest to Representative Thiessen that your point you make is a good one. That we do get that question frequently, and many of our viewers, of course, do hunt and fish, and it's of concern to them. So my guess is that when we reconvene in March of next year, we'll have a chance to talk about this one some more. So let's talk about the big issue, the education question. The question that has been much in the press, and maybe let's start with you, Representative Thiessen. Maybe you could tell our viewers a little bit how that issue unfolded from your perspective and where you think it might go.
The education issue.
The education issue.
Yeah, well...
and we're talking K-12 here, pre-K.
Right. Sure. I think... well, I mean, it's an issue that evolved a lot over the course of the session. And I think one of the interesting things about it is that, except for the governor, I suppose, but both bodies of the legislature started out lower than where we ultimately ended up in conference committee. I think the House was at about $150 million or so above the base. And about a 0.5% increase on the formula and some early childhood education. The Senate was somewhat above that, but after the conference committee process, we ended up at, I think, $400 million. And the governor started out higher than that, partly because he has this proposal to do all-day pre-K, or started out with that proposal, which, in addition to doing something on the formula and some other investments. And kind of where we are right now, I think, is that the governor wasn't satisfied, didn't agree with where the legislature ended up on education funding, wanted to do more for early childhood, and in particular this pre-kindergarten effort. And, I think from his perspective, in talking with him, he sees this issue as kind of a historic opportunity for the state. We have a nearly $2 billion surplus, and in that context, and the fact that we know right now that the science is pretty clear that those years from birth to 5 are really critical for brain development. Up to 90% of your brain development is complete by the time you reach age 5. And he thinks this is the time to make that kind of historic investment and not just put money kind of where we've always put it before, but to really focus on the place where that achievement gap can be closed. And so he's very strongly committed to that. And as a result, we weren't able to reach an agreement with the bill that the legislature passed and what the governor could sign. And that's where we are now, going to, I think, special session over there. Well, in fact, we are. I just saw the veto letter today.
Representative Walker, your thoughts, or Representative Anderson, rather, your thoughts on this?
Sure. Representative Thiessen's correct. It's $400 million in additional funding that we provided for K-12 education. But when you compare it to the last biennium, we're talking about $1.3 billion more than what we funded in the last biennium is going towards K-12 education. Out of that amount, we have about $60 million is going to be dedicated to early learning. That's programs like pre-K scholarships for students that are in need of it. And from my perspective, I know the governor has been really adamant that it be spent on universal pre-kindergarten care for 4-year-olds. But the input that I get from my constituents is they want to see the dollars targeted to those who need it most. One of my constituents actually happens to be Art Rolnick, who has been a huge advocate for having targeted resources going towards early learning scholarships. And I think that that's the right approach. I think that going with universal pre-K and the dollars that the governor is proposing far underfund what would really need to take place if that was to be what he wanted to do. And I also see it as a property tax increase for citizens across the state, because to even make that realistic, a lot of these school districts are going to have to expand their buildings in order to make this work. My school district in particular, when the all-day K funding was put in place, had to do a lot of last-minute rejiggering of their space, and now we're going through more building just to accommodate that last piece of legislation, and this will just add to the property tax burden of citizens.
So for our viewers who are wondering who Art Rolnick is, he's the former chief economist, I believe, of the Federal Reserve Bank
Right.
here, and has been following pre-K and education issues for, I don't know, a decade or more. So,
He put the issue on the map in Minnesota, I would say. Yeah.
Senator, your thoughts?
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts about this whole situation with the E12 bill, because spent my time, mostly the 15, 16, 17 years that I've been in the legislature, I've been working on education. I think for the Senate Democrats, we really wanted to put education as our number one issue. And it was, I believe, as for the Senate Democrats, transportation and education. For me, it was education. There wasn't enough money in that bill, even at $400, to meet the needs of what we figured was important. I think Representative Thiessen said it when it's become very well known that those early years are very important, and we look at this as closing the achievement gap and preparing our workforce for the future. We have to admit that many of our children are coming into the schools coming from families of very low income. The percentage is increasing greatly of children that are coming from homes that have very much needs. We believe that will help to solve the problem. The House came out with 150 when we finally got the targets, which was very late in the session. The Senate went to 350, and the governor was at 650, I believe. So right there, we see the difference between the groups of people. The governors, I think, came out with a very strong visionary proposal. And he said, this is a proposal, it's not the law. And so that told me he said, this is what I'd like, but none of us get what we like over there, only ourselves. We have to compromise with everyone else. And we tried to compromise. We got up to 400 then, which was great. We were happy about that. And the Senate then raised the amount of money that was put on the formula, which is what the schools really want. School boards and superintendents have really been crying for that, and it's needed. There's no doubt about that. However, we came up to, we hoped we would get 2 and 2. It didn't work that way, and in order to meet the needs of what we thought was important for the whole state of Minnesota, we didn't listen to what the governor wanted to say very well, although we wanted to, because we knew it was the best thing, but we thought it might work out. It didn't.
Senator Hand, your thoughts?
Well, I think the key here is that what we did was essentially a compromise. You have Republicans in control of the House and Democrats in control of the Senate, and the bill that we ended up with that came out of the compromise, the conference process, was more money than either body had proposed. So I think that was a gesture to the governor to say, okay, let's put some more money in this education bill. But the pre-K part of it that the governor was really interested in, that he said was his top priority, I think you're right. There wasn't a lot of movement in the legislature. I think Senator Uyghur said on the floor that they had a hearing, but they didn't vote on it. So I think, and coming from a school board, I served on a school board for 8 years. I think the holy grail for school boards is put money on the formula, put the money into a sort of a neutral fund that we can decide locally how to use. Can certainly use it for pre-K things, but they use it for other things as well. So I think the legislature trying to find a bill that will pass both bodies. They came up with a structure that was maybe more money, but most of it on the formula. And the governor's program, it just didn't gain any traction in either house, and so I think it was very difficult for that to be part of the compromise. Looks like we're going to have to deal with it in a special session.
So when do we know when the special session will be? And
I have not.
All yet to be sorted out.
I have not heard. Typically, and I expect in this case, the governor will try to negotiate with the leadership in the House and the Senate to try to work through whatever they think they can put together and probably set down some agreement about what we will and won't do, because the governor can call this to session, but he can't end it. So we typically want to go in with a pretty clear sense of here's what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. I think that's probably going to take a couple of weeks to get that sorted out.
I think so, too.
So, and then the question is, where will you meet? Because as I understand it, the desks are gone, and there was some suggestion, I think the governor suggested you could pitch a tent maybe, but I suspect that was not made seriously. What happens next?
St. Paul Hotel.
Right.
They offered They offered that we could do it.
Yeah, I mean, the Historical Society, I think, would be their building would be an option. William Mitchell, I know, is interested in hosting it, but I think the details of that have yet to be.
Another reason that we don't look for it to happen in the next day or two.
I think a great place would be Union Depot. We could all get on the train and ride down to Union Depot and do our business and then come back and park here.
There we go.
That would not be out of the possibility.
All right, so while we're on the education process, let's talk about the 2016 session in higher education and where that went, and talk a little bit about what issues you thought were addressed and not addressed. Should we start with you, Representative Anderson?
Sure. So we increased funding for higher education by about $166 million over base. With that included $22 million to the University of Minnesota for student tuition relief, and I think it's about $100 million for MnSCU students for tuition relief. So it was a comprehensive package, taking a look at all of those different issues and trying to help out families and students to make college more affordable. And the more well-educated students that we have, the better our state is, and puts us in good standing as far as the economy goes. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, my disappointment on the higher education proposal is that we are going to have tuitions going up. I think that's an inevitable result, at least at our four-year institutions, whether in the MnSCU system or at the University of Minnesota. And the disparity between the investment at the University of Minnesota and our MnSCU colleges, which we rarely have done, and certainly not to this scope, where you're probably getting, in terms of money going to the, there's $30 million going to this health medical center, medical school piece, but at the university. But aside from that, it's close to 4-to-1 differential ratio between what's going to MnSCU and the University of Minnesota. And that makes me concerned because it does kind of break a precedent that we've had in the past. And the reality is, we have $1 billion that is left unspent right now. It wasn't used for tax cuts. It wasn't used for investment in programs. You take 75 or 80 million of that and you put it into the University of Minnesota and the MnSCU systems, and you get a college tuition freeze, another 2 years of that college tuition freeze. We know that the affordability of college is a serious issue for a lot of families, and as tuition goes up, that's money out of those families' pockets, just like taxes are. But it's money out of your pockets that you have to pay interest on, unlike taxes, unless you're late with your taxes, I suppose. And so, I think that there really could have been a bigger commitment to extending that tuition freeze. I know there's probably policy differences that we're going to have on whether that's a good idea or not. But from my perspective, I wish we would have done more there.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is a disparity between the funding for the university and the MnSCU, and I wasn't a part of that conference process, so I don't know what the whole debate was that led to that. But it's a little unusual to have that. But nevertheless, I think the goal of using tuition freezes as a way of dealing with affordability of higher education is really a short-term solution. And I've met with President Kaler and people from the MnSCU system. I think their real challenge is to try to develop a cost structure that ordinary people can afford to pay. I think that over the years this has just gotten out of control, and now they've got a cost to do higher education that can only be afforded if there's a significant amount of money coming from the legislature to sort of buy down that tuition. I think that's the challenge that the higher ed people have to come to grips with, because I just don't think that going forward you're going to have the legislature be able to put that much more money into this year after year. There's going to have to be a way to get this contracted to be something more affordable. That didn't happen this year. I don't think that's going to be a short-term problem to solve, but they're going to have to come to grips with that pretty soon.
We can't forget about the technical and community colleges. And there are, right now, we're looking at a shortage of people with educations for the jobs that technical and community, well, especially technical colleges put out. And so I think Senator Leroy Stump had a bill introduced saying technical college education would be free. Well, again, I think that was a pretty big vision on Senator Stump's part, but I think it brought attention to the issue that we're facing. So again, we have to keep looking at that, those kinds of things, and that was neglected, I think.
Early in the session, we had some discussion about administrative expenses at both the University of Minnesota and MnSCU, and I think State Representative from Winona, Gene Pawlowski, he can get quite impassioned on this topic, and sort of led us on an educational tour here around the table about why it was important and the concerns that it generated. I'm wondering, did that influence at all these discussions or the final bill, Representative Anderson?
I didn't serve on that conference committee or on that committee at all, but I'm guessing that it has. I mean, unfortunately, the University of Minnesota in particular has been highlighted in what is it, New York Times, I think, Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal had a piece, although I will say in defense of the U, the current president had some challenge. He was not convinced that their numbers were accurate, but nonetheless, the issue exists.
It exists, and unfortunately, it puts a black eye on the state of Minnesota, and I think it raises questions about how dollars are being used over there. And I think this kind of was it was kind of a tumbleweed effect, because you had the issue of the golden parachutes that were happening. It was kind of a big mess, and I don't think that we have recovered from that. And I think, unfortunately, for the University of Minnesota, they're going to have to play catch up a little bit when it comes to just public perception on that issue. And I know they've been trying hard on it, but I think that's probably played a little role in what happened.
I'd also say, though, that the Representative Pawlowski, when he was chair of the committee over the previous 2 years, did a lot of work to kind of shed some light on that. And I'm not sure that the legislature really stepped up to that job this year of continuing the oversight of the University of Minnesota. And I think hopefully in 2016, even in the interim, that committee will take some time to do that, because it is an important issue.
Right. I think the university is a little bit of a challenge. We don't have, as a legislature, direct ability to manage the university. They're kind of a separate institution. Mm-hmm. We can give them money and we can make suggestions, but we really can't control what they do as much as we can with the MnSCU system. And I think that does present some challenge. I do think President Kaler is doing a good job. I think he's very concerned about the administrative costs, and he's trying to figure out how to get this back in shape. I have confidence in him. I just think it's a longer-term problem that we're going to have to wrestle with for some time.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that question? If not, we move to a question from a viewer in Edina who wants to know if our panel could identify bills that maybe one chamber passed and the other did not, or either failed or did not get to, and wants to know whether or not might be some of those bills that might get resurrected in the special session process. This is not infrequently an issue, particularly when the two chambers are controlled by different parties. Some bills go places, others don't. Who wants to talk about that?
Well, I think the one that comes to mind is that we passed a bonding bill at the very last minute, actually.
Yeah, can't blame the House there.
Right, and you're right. It's one of those things that there'd been a lot of talk about throughout the session. There's some flood relief and other disaster relief. It was going to be rather modest in scope. I think it was about $100 million. Some renovation for the Capitol, some trunk highway bonds, but actually for a bonding bill, pretty modest in size. And we finally took it up, but it was very, very late in the hour, a couple of minutes before the deadline at midnight. And we did manage to pass it, but I think by the time we passed it, the House had already adjourned or something. And I think that is going to have to be taken up maybe in the special session to try to do something. There's some of those issues I think need to be addressed.
Other bills like that?
I can talk about one very personally. That is my bill for free breakfast for K through 3 and it cost $8 million about. Very good investment, I would say. The governor and I share our views. The governor had it in his budget for K through 6, but because of the dispute about what we needed to do and the target that wasn't high enough, that lost and in the Senate, but it did not pass in the House at all, although it had been considered and included in the omnibus education bill.
Other bills?
Oh, legacy bill, which this has happened before. Legacy is the constitutionally dedicated sales tax money that goes to the arts, to environment, and whatnot. And we are required to spend that money, and I think it's, over $500 million or so that you're talking about, and it just ran out of time at the end. So
that's one where the House passed it, but didn't get to the Senate quite in time.
Right.
And I think, as we look at, I think one of the open questions right now, kind of looking at this issue from a larger perspective, is whether this session is going to be limited to, I think those three, the bonding bill, legacy bill, and education, clearly with the veto are going to be on the table. But do we do other things? I mean, does the tax bill and the transportation bill, which were also, there was a lights-on transportation bill, but kind of the big reform for transportation and the tax bill, which didn't pass, do those get put on the table too as part of this special session? And, I would argue we should at least consider that if there's a way to reach compromise on that, because, if we're going to do it in 2017, we might as well get the tax relief out to people and the money to the roads and bridges this year if we can.
Let's talk about transportation and taxes. Those are two issues we've spent a lot of time talking about, and in the end, relatively little action on those, I think we could probably say. Senator Hann, what do you think?
Not surprisingly, I think the Republicans and the Democrats have differing ideas on these two big topics, and there was a lot of discussion early on about transportation and a recognition of a need to try to put additional funding. I think that the two approaches, the governor and the Democrat majority in the Senate, want to do gas taxes, and on the Republican side, we're not really too enthused about that idea. So there was an alternative plan that was proposed by the House Republicans. I thought was a pretty creative approach. But I think in the course of all the other things in the budget, I just don't think there was enough time in that sort of compromise environment to say, how do you wrestle with that big problem? You don't really have to solve that funding problem for more investment in transportation as a part of a budget. So I think that got set aside early on in the negotiations, and they said, well, let's just sort of save the money over here and come back another day and see if we can work more on that. I do think that we will address that, if not in the special session, certainly next year. But just very, very different approaches on how we solve that problem. I think it's going to take a little more work.
Representative Anderson?
We came out with a $7 billion package for transportation to help us over the next 10 years. And the governor and the Senate was adamant that it would be a gas tax or nothing. And I think that's really unfortunate. I know that there are transportation needs out there, and this would have given us the leg up to kind of get a handle on some of those issues. But it's clear from the public that this is not what they're interested in doing, a gas tax after having a $2.1 billion tax increase passed on to them over the last 2 years. Just wasn't something that they were willing to do. They just didn't have the appetite for it. And, we were able to offer an alternative that was able to do $7 billion worth of investment without a gas tax. So that really hung things up and was kind of an indicator of how things ended up in the end.
It was interesting because we started the session this year with what we call One Minnesota, which brings all the House and Senate members together and all sorts of interested parties, and spent a lot of time on transportation and had support from all the communities, you might say. The Chamber of Commerce, the Minnesota Business Partnership, all of them were saying transportation was one of the most important things we should do. So it was just a matter of how to do it. And the difference, I think, with the Senate Democrats, and I'm not a transportation expert, I'm not going to speak for the whole Senate, but Democrats. But for myself, the way I saw it is we wanted a long, solid, secure, long-term method of financing transportation and not just depending on what is in the budget each year or each session. So that's where I think the major disagreement is, and I hope we can find a solution to it because the people want it really bad, and it's much needed.
So a possibility, though, that it might show up on the special session agenda, maybe?
Potentially.
Well, I think that there is. I think there is a compromise to be reached on this issue. And I think a generation ago or two, 50 years ago, the people of Minnesota said we're going to raise the gas tax and we're going to dedicate it in the Constitution to roads and bridges, and it passed with 83% of the vote. And I think there's a lesson there, frankly, from our parents and grandparents about the obligations we have now. I mean, we've benefited greatly from that to our kids and our grandkids. But I think there is a compromise to be reached. From my perspective, I do have a concern about relying on the general fund and borrowing, which is essentially the Republican plan, going into the future. And I think you saw it in the Republican budget that passed out of the House, at least, where the education money was squeezed to a very low amount. I mean, much lower than either the governor or the Senate, largely because they wanted to use a big portion of the general fund for transportation. Had that transportation investment not been there, close to $600 million, there would have been $500 million to put in education. So I think you can see that competition. And when we get to a time, which we'll inevitably get to, when the economy turns down, having that competition for those general fund dollars with education and roads and hospitals and whatever else it is, I think it becomes very challenging. That said, I think there probably can be a compromise where there is some general fund used, but I think maybe a lower gas tax than the Senate and the governor have proposed. And I think that there's a place that we can land, but each side needs to kind of get off their hardline positions and be willing to compromise, and that would be good for the people of Minnesota.
I think the difference, though, between what we had the last time around with the gas tax situation and what we have now is the fact that they did experience a $2.1 billion increase in the last 2 years. And on top of that, the last go around when they were talking about the gas tax, one of the key components of getting that compromise was asking for efficiencies within MnDOT in particular. And that never materialized. So I think people kind of feel that they were sold a bill of goods that never actually happened and got to that spot. The nice thing is the bill that we presented on the House side had a requirement that MnDOT find 15% inefficiencies. And, it's sad that you have to actually outline it, that this is what you need to do, and give that kind of directive and not rely on the faith that they are going to do what was part of the compromise to begin with. But I think if we can do those kinds of efficiencies, I think that will be helpful in getting people to feel better about this process overall.
And I think that MnDOT actually, under Commissioner Zelle, has delivered on that efficiency promise and done a much better job about that. Not to get into the details, but there was also some double counting of money, I think, in the House bill. So I don't know if it totally adds up to $7 billion. But, the bottom line is I think efficiencies do need to be part of it. That should be part of the compromise discussion that we have. And I think if we kind of set everything on the table, we can get there. I do want to make one correction, though, because it's been bugging me all session. $1.6 billion in taxes is what we raised because we did give back about $500 million in tax relief in 2014. So just to put that on the table, it's not $2.1 billion. But there's both big numbers, and probably the argument remains the same.
The one thing I would, say, I think this is an issue that we need to find some compromise on. I'm skeptical that we'd be able to do it in a special session, frankly. I think it's going to be, a heavy lift to find a way to get a compromise education bill passed, given that what we did pass was tough. I think in the Senate there were not enough votes on the majority side to pass it without votes from the Republicans. I think you start messing with that structure and bringing new things into it, that could become a real problem to sort that out. So I think that the transportation issue, obviously, I believe there's a way to get to a place where we can agree. I'm just not sure we can do that in a special session unless we're contemplating a very long special session, and I don't think that I'm not up for that. I don't know if anybody else is. But
I think we're going to need the help of the people, and that's our voters telling us that they want some money spent on transportation and education. And I think they're very kind of skeptical about what has been going on this past session with a $2 billion surplus and expected to get something from that money. And I think education and transportation are the two main issues that our constituents are concerned about.
All right, so a viewer from Brooklyn Park wants to help our panel on the pre-K issue, and he or she has a suggestion here. Maybe we should just separate the K-12 and pre-K questions and deal with them separately. Maybe that'll help us reach an agreement. My guess is that, well, anyway, I'm not going to guess, but let's respond to the viewer's question. Representative Thiessen?
So, I mean, I think that I think that the reason that they are together is just more innate, more a creature of the way that our committee structure is set up and our budgets are set up. The money all runs through the Department of Education largely. And so it may be a suggestion worth looking at. And I imagine as part of the discussion that, I mean, I think that piece probably did come through when the realization hearing from school districts and school boards and superintendents that 0.5% or 1% that people were proposing to put on the formula wasn't sufficient to avoid layoffs, wasn't sufficient to avoid larger class sizes, and there was a response from the legislature on that and the K-12 side, and then separately trying to find money for the early childhood piece. I think it does raise another question, though, which is the one, and I don't know if we'll be able to struggle through this in this special session, but the real question is, we have scholarships, which I think has broad bipartisan support. We have school readiness. The governor has the pre-K proposal, which I think is actually a proposal really worth seriously considering. We have our child care subsidies. All of these programs are going essentially to do the same thing, which is to support families and young kids. And we have the nurse visiting program for even younger kids, 0 to 2. One thing we haven't done well as a legislature and we need to do is figure out how all of those pieces fit together, because we do spend quite a lot of money in this area, but it doesn't always, the pieces don't always fit together accurately. And so spending some time, I think, stepping back and looking at the 0 to 5-year-old time period from a more comprehensive approach, I think could actually lead to some better solutions and maybe be a way that we can find some compromise.
I'd like to say that I think there are a lot of ways we could do things, and I read in the Governing magazine that we legislators get the city of San Antonio in Texas put into effect a 1/8% sales tax for 4-year-old school. And in some cases, they had, as you said, Senator Anderson, there wasn't, or Representative Anderson, I'm sorry, they didn't have room, that they formed like a co-op. They built a building that was all for 4-year-olds, and that certainly could be something that's done. I think the main thing is really to have people honestly say that they support pre-K education, and then it will happen, because I think it's very doable. And I have suggested to the commissioner and to the governor that let's just put a pot of money out there for pre-K, and those schools that are ready for it and can handle it should do it. And those that can't, you don't have any room, you can't find the teachers, well, they'll get to that point, and I would maintain that the parents and the people in the districts will be clamoring at their school boards and superintendents to say, we want our children in 4-year school in school at 4 years of age, and it will happen. If you really want it to happen, I think it will happen quite easily, actually.
Well, I think there are some other issues with this that is part of the reason why there's some resistance on the part of some in the legislature. I'm one of them that says this may not be the best way to approach this. The governor's plan really says that the pre-K has to be in the public school system, and so if you want to have you can certainly choose another place for pre-K if you want to, but the funding that he's talking about only would go to the public school system, which is why I think it's part of the education bill. It also is not targeted, which means that potentially millionaires and billionaires would be able to send their kids for free to a pre-K education in the public school. So there's an expansion here of the mission, if you will, of K-12 education that some of us find a little troubling. I just happened to read today an article in Psychology Today, which I don't think has a political bent particularly, but the article was about the differences between academic preschool and what they call play-based preschool. And from what the article said, the research shows that having an academic pre-K or even academic kindergarten doesn't have lasting results and can, in fact, do more damage to kids as they mature and they don't have that sort of socialization that comes from kind of a play-based environment. So I think there's more than just, do you care about pre-K education? I think Art Rolnick is right. There may be a need to target certain kids and make sure they have that opportunity, but what the governor is proposing is much, much broader than that. I think it raises some real questions that need to be addressed, and I think it's going to be a tough thing to come to grips with, but I don't think he's fair in saying that people who don't support his proposal are not in favor of education. I wish he wouldn't have said that. I don't think that's true. I think there are different approaches, and there's a very sincere debate going on.
I would agree with you, Senator Han. It doesn't mean that people don't believe in education, but, Minnesota is at the bottom of the pile for educating or working with 4-year-olds. And that is a fact. And so all of the other states have apparently, and cities have apparently found it to be very valuable or something worthwhile. Anoka-Hennepin School District, one that I represent, has gone ahead on their own and started bringing in the 4-year-olds because they found so many children that weren't ready for kindergarten. And you know what? It pays off.
But I mean, it's the whole idea of having it be a one-size-fits-all approach, which I think is just a waste of resources. We have a finite number of resources available to us. Wouldn't it be better to get those resources to the students that need it the most, rather than, as you say, having it go to people that certainly have the financial means and have the resources available to them to find a center that meets their needs? I'll just, speak from my personal experience. I'm probably the one closest to having a child in daycare, in a child care setting. My son is 7. It was just 3 years ago that he was in that. In fact, he goes to morning pre-K or morning care before I come to the Capitol. And I spent weeks interviewing all the different facilities to find the one that met my standards, my husband and I's standards. And we wanted the place that had a balance between playtime, that had a balance between academics, and it wasn't just one size, one way to go about it. If you have it in a situation where parents now are required to only go to this public school setting and don't have that opportunity to kind of figure out what meets their needs best or what they want to see for their child, I think you're taking away the parental involvement that we so clamor for in our child's education, that we view as being very important to having a child be successful in a long-term academic setting. So I think it's just not. There is a better way to use those resources, and that's where I agree with Art Rolnick and his philosophy of target those resources to the students that need it the most, and we'll get the better bang for our buck in the long run.
I think the thing, though, is that, first of all, no one is being required to go to a pre-K program. Parents can certainly choose to send their child and perhaps use scholarships that we have to send them to a different kind of program. So no one's being told that you have to go. It's not like first grade where you have to actually sit in the seat in a school. So I don't think that that's really a fair argument. And this issue about targeting, we have about 64,000 4-year-olds in the state of Minnesota, roughly, and about 42% of them are 185 free or reduced lunch level. So they would qualify for free and reduced lunch. So that's about 27,000 kids. We're now serving 6,000 or 7,000 of them with the scholarship program. So in terms of targeting where those resources are needed, we're already missing 20,000 kids every year in Minnesota who probably could use those. Beyond that, even some of these middle class families who may not qualify there, many of those families probably do have, some of them certainly have children that would benefit from this. So I think that clearly this is a complex debate that we need to continue. The last thing that I would say, though, is there was just a referendum in Willmar this week where the people of Willmar, the voters of Willmar, the parents and the kids, so not the school board, not the school district, although they supported it, said we're going to raise our property taxes to invest in facilities for pre-K. So I think the people of Minnesota out there recognize this, and it's reflected as one example in that vote in Willmar.
But you said it right there, Representative Thiessen. This is a complex issue. And I don't think that we've had this level of conversation on this issue. And it's kind of like I feel like we have to jump in or else, the lake is going to be gone tomorrow. And that's not the situation. And I think if the governor was willing to, as you said, he put it out there as an idea. A vision. Well, that takes time, and I don't think that he has thought through all. I'm not saying this as a criticism. I'm just saying I think there is a lot more to this issue that we need to have a conversation about, rather than jumping into something that we may later on regret.
I really have to. I would say correct some of the information that's come forward. I don't think the governor sees this as the only way to take care of 4-year-olds. He's been very supportive of talking about having the learning readiness programs, including ECFE, Head Start,
Northside Achievement Zone.
Northside Achievement Zone, yes. So I do really believe that if we would have put in I thought maybe $50 million and put it into to the pre-K program, the governor would have been satisfied. As I say, it was a vision. I don't think he really expected it to pass.
I think we're going to probably not resolve that issue here, but let me just say that this has been an exploration of some of the philosophical divide and issues that exist on this question, the likes of which you don't often see, and I really appreciate the contribution of all four of you on this question, and I look forward to all four of you settling this issue in your one-day special session, and I'm sure it'll all just be taken care of there. I think there will be more conversation. I think there will be more. So let's tick off some issues that other viewers have concerns about. Viewer Laverne wants to know, with all the action in the legislature, was there any additional money for the Lewis and Clark Water Project? That's, of course, a great concern to our southwestern Minnesota viewers.
I don't know that there was. I don't think that there was. The bonding bill didn't pass, and
no, there was nothing. I don't think in the bonding.
And I don't think there was anything in it.
Didn't we do something early on that?
Yeah. You know what? I think it was part of the deficiency bill.
Maybe it was.
I do believe that there was, and if I'm mistaken,
that seems so long ago now.
So so the answer to that is probably, but it wasn't in the rush of the last 2 or 3 days.
No, it was. I think it was early.
So then we've had questions from viewers off and on about whether or not we had a spirited discussion here a couple of weeks ago about moving the primary and what we should do about that. I guess it was actually last week. And so the question was, did that have any legs? Did anything happen on that?
No. It was
heard.
Yeah.
We had one hearing on it June 12th, I think it was. Maybe in state and local?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yes, but no action took place
No
on that this year.
Constitutional amendments, the only one that's on the ballot is the one dealing with
taking away our right to raise our pay.
Right,
yes.
Right.
Oh, wow, that's the way to phrase it.
That is the way to. That's the way
I would disagree with that.
You characterize it a little differently?
Yes. I mean, when you look at states that have gone the route of having a commission raise the pay of legislators, they have raised the pay of legislators significantly. California is a prime example. They went well over $100,000 that they're paying their legislators. And so I think it's kind of a backdoor way for legislators to increase their pay, and I just don't think that that's the way to go.
And just so our viewers are clear on what happened here, this is a constitutional amendment which will be voted on by the voters in November of 2016.
Correct.
So, and actually, it wouldn't be atypical for additional constitutional amendments, if there are going to be any, to be considered next year in the 2016 session. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
Yep.
All right. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. Now, a viewer from Candy, Ohio, Minnesota, not too far from Willmar, wants to talk about taxpayer support of nursing homes, wants to know what's going on there in this session, and also wants to know, why do we set wages in nursing homes in St. Paul? And so let's talk about nursing home funding. Who wants to start with that? Senator Hand, should we start with you?
Well, there was a significant amount of funding for nursing homes. It was in as part of the House agenda. I guess they really made a commitment to trying to do some things for rural Minnesota, and not just rural Minnesota, but nursing homes in general. And I think it was about 138 million. So that's a significant amount of money. And I guess the question of why do we do it in St. Paul, I think it has to do with the fact that we have regulations about nursing care, and if a person is going to qualify for a nursing home, then we do the funding, and so that translates into. I don't think we don't set their wages directly, but we do control the amount of funding that goes into the nursing homes, from which they have to figure out how to pay the people. And most of the folks in nursing care are there because they're getting some kind of support either from federal or state programs. So there are just limits to that money, and that translates into limits on how much people get paid.
I mean, the interesting thing about, and it was, I think it was one of the highlights of the session that this nursing home reform went through. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things about it, though, are people that private pay, so that they're not supported by, they're not on Medicaid for their nursing homes. Their rates are going to go up by the same amount, and some of these places rates are going up 40, 50%. So some of those private pay, because of the way our laws work, and federal law, in fact, limits how much you can change it as well, are going to see 40 to 50% increases in the price they're going to have to pay at the nursing home as well. So that's going to be kind of an interesting twist on this. The other thing that's notable, though, is we limited our investment to nursing homes. So personal care attendants, people that work in group homes with people with disabilities, people that work in assisted living facilities, no new money went into that part of the system. So, we're also seeing a disparity a little bit in how we're funding different parts of our long-term care system.
And we did do 5% last year for the non-nursing homes. So, and that's a question.
Kind of catch up.
Right, and you could argue maybe that's not enough, but like anything, there's always limits to what resources you have. And I think it's bipartisan. There are concerns about the level of funding that we're providing for elderly care. I think there's probably still more work to be done.
I would believe that was probably the most favored part of the Health and Human Services bill. That most everyone was very happy with it. Some people thought it was we had so many other needs that it maybe shouldn't have been quite as much money, but everyone they're deserving. They're definitely deserving.
That and child protection, I think, was the other
child protection.
That was huge.
change. Yeah.
That's great.
Viewer from Northfield wants to know whether the panel has any thoughts on what the viewer describes as the elimination of the MPCA Citizen Board. It's not a question we've had before. Does anybody know anything about that? Care to comment?
Yes.
Well, now it rests with the commissioner. We'll have the responsibility for it.
Can you explain to our viewers what's going on there and what that's about?
Sure. So I think that there was some concern centered around having it outside of the commissioner's authority and being responsible to the elected officials, the legislators, and the governor, and so forth. And I think that was part of the process of doing that change. So
so for several decades, the MPCA commissioner can make decisions about permitting, for feedlots and any number of things. But there was also the Citizens Board. If the commissioner decided that further investigation was not needed, the Citizens Board could override that decision and say, Commissioner, you actually have to do an environmental impact statement or what have you. And I think a lot of people around the state think that that process actually brought some more transparency, some more public input into a process and things that actually affect a lot of, you change your feedlot size, as an example, it's going to affect all your neighbors. And so having some public input on that, I think, was something that we've done for a long time and a lot of people support. And so eliminating that, it doesn't stop the commissioner from making his decisions, but it does eliminate kind of one level of public input. I will say that there are probably too many and a growing number of unelected officials making a lot of decisions with the people and the money of the state of Minnesota, and it's something that we need to take a look at. But I'm not sure eliminating the Citizens Board was necessarily the right step. In fact, neither the House nor the Senate actually eliminated it in their bills. rules. They just put more restrictions around it. And then through the conference committee process, somehow it disappeared. So it's kind of the magic of the conference committee process. But I think this is probably an issue that will be revisited, not in the special session, I don't imagine, but next year.
It's a very volatile issue with a lot of environmentalists, and it should be of great concern to all of us, because there's some really big decisions that are made by some of these agencies, and I think the citizen input is good.
But I think there were some cases, and I was not in the committee, but what I understood that there were testimony of some things that might be characterized as sort of abuse of that process. Mm-hmm. And because these are unelected people and they don't have an accountability to the people that they serve, there are things that happen sometimes that shouldn't happen. And Minnesota is kind of an outlier. I think we're the only state that had this kind of a structure for environmental review. And I think we need to be concerned about making Minnesota so unique in how we do regulation. Agriculture, especially large agriculture, is a big business. Mm-hmm. I know there have been cases where people have left the state to go to South Dakota or other states where they could operate their business and do it in a little bit more business-friendly way. And I think we have to be careful when we have these kinds of regulations that make it very difficult for people to work with.
But procedurally, what's happened here is this has gone to the commissioner then? Is that
correct?
So, and like, as you say, Representative Thiessen, we'll probably see some more about this next session. So another question that we had early in the session was this question whether or not there was going to be any reform bills relating to the Metropolitan Council.
See, that's very tied. Yes, very much so.
And so, Representative Anderson, anything happen on that this session?
Well, in the state government finance bill, we had a couple of provisions that would have gotten at the issue. The Senate was not too keen in making those changes. Instead, I think a group of county commissioners, legislators, and city officials are looking to set up what they call this Blue Ribbon Commission, which will be designed to look at all of the different issues and then recommend a package to the legislature. We had some hearings here, a subcommittee that was put together to try and get at this issue, but I think we need a little bit more time to address the matter and getting more feedback from the local elected officials that have to live by the rules of Met Council, I think would be helpful. I've experienced problems with the Met Council out in my neck of the woods. I'm sure you guys have as well. It seems like no one is untouched by their dealings. Mine was an issue with Highway 494. They were making it literally impossible to expand that last section of 494 that goes from basically Eden Prairie up to Maple Grove. And once we finally got them out of the way, we were finally able to get that passed in a reasonable amount of money.
Representative Thiessen, any thoughts on that?
No. I don't have very much information.
I've thought that if we had a sort of a Met Council-like structure for all of Minnesota, then the legislature as a whole would decide to rethink Met Council. I think there's only a very few of us that actually are affected by it, and those of us who are, we have real issues with how they do it. But I do think it needs reformed. We did have a couple of bills, but nothing got done.
Special session, anybody want to make a prediction about when? We said a couple of weeks. Any thoughts?
I think it's going to be June.
June? All right.
I'd say mid-June. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to take the opportunity to thank our panel for your contribution this evening. I want to thank you, the viewers, who've been with us every step of the way since we began in January of this year. We're delighted to have you with us. This program is designed for you. We're thrilled with the questions you've sent us. We look forward to returning again in 2016, and we look forward to your questions and participation because, after all, this is your legislators. Thank you all, and good night.
There's much more about Your Legislators online at pioneer.org/yourlegislators. Find out more about the history of the program, who's been a guest, and watch all of our past episodes. There's also a photo gallery, informative links, and much more. You can also get involved and stay in touch by following us on Twitter and join us in the discussion on our Facebook page. Thank you for watching Your Legislators. Major funding for Your Legislators is provided by Move Minnesota, a statewide coalition fighting for a 10-year commitment to fixing our dire transportation needs. A safe, reliable transportation system strengthens Minnesota's economy. Join the conversation at movemn.org. Additional funding provided by Flaherty and Hood has provided quality legal and legislative services to clients in Greater Minnesota for more than 20 years. Our legal team focuses on municipal employment and environmental law, while our lobbyists energetically represent clients at the state capitol. Online at flaherty-hood.com. MAPE members, making Minnesota Clean Water's safe communities, quality education, and veterans care happen. We work hard for Minnesotans.